Well, the question is that agreeing with what I was saying about the politics of poverty, what about the assembly line kind of production, which has made possible the society of television and relative affluence for some people? Can we do anything about the character of the work? I think the answer is yes, and I think there are going to be tremendous demands for it. Right now in Sweden, they're experimenting in the automobile plants with work teams. Rather than having an assembly line, you have a group of workers who actually build a car, who have some relationship to the finished product. The Swedes, as the American automobile makers will tell you, are a highly competitive bunch. If you notice the amount of Volvos running around the United States and Saabs and other Swedish cars, what they are doing is they are betting that by improving the character of work, they will so improve productivity that they will be even more competitive than they now are in the American market. Secondly, though, there's an interesting problem here that I was discussing just the other day with a friend of mine who used to be, for about 8 or 9 years, on the staff of the United Automobile Workers. And he was talking about workers in the plant and their attitude towards making the job more interesting. And he was saying every worker in the plant tries to figure out a way so he can save up some time, so he can bank a little time, so he can stand there for 2 whole minutes and smoke a cigarette, having put in 38 bolts ahead. So he's trying to figure out a labor-saving method to get that time banked. The company has got guys in trying to watch the worker saving the time so that as soon as he figures out a way to get 2 minutes ahead, they incorporate that innovation of the worker into the speed up. So the worker not only has to find a way to get ahead, but he has to conceal it from the foreman at the same time. It's a dead serious aspect of life in a shop. And this guy was saying, and I think it's probably true, that if you could make some kind of a deal whereby the workers would really get to keep the fruits of their technological innovation for themselves, or at least part of them, there would be an absolutely incredible outpouring of productivity in the automobile shops. And one of the things right now, when you talk about job enrichment to a worker, what a worker says is that another name for my unemployment. You want to make this easier, more interesting, more enjoyable, and to be done with less workers. Therefore, I think that the problem of dealing with the boredom of the job requires, if not anti-capitalist priorities, some rather non-capitalist priorities, like putting workers before profits. And I think that's pretty radical stuff, and it'll take a lot of trade union action, a lot of legislation, but I think it's certainly worth trying, because I certainly would not want to work on an assembly line. The question is, if I said that the rich profit from the poor, how then are you going to have an elite which is profiting from the poor going to create jobs to abolish poverty? I might have been understood as saying that the rich profit from the poor. I was saying it in one sense. But what I was not saying was that the wealth of America depends upon the exploitation of the poor. I think that a certain amount of absolutely miserable, tragic, unconscionable wealth is taken out by cockroach capitalists in the real estate industry who speculate on 235. From the point of view of GM, the fact that there is a market, a potential market of perhaps 20% of the American people who don't have enough money to buy a new car is bad. Lyndon Johnson used to put this in a way which I think is a little too crude for my taste, but it was sort of an effective Johnson point. He used to say, we're going to take tax eaters and turn them into taxpayers. That is to say, I would argue as a socialist that it is in the enlightened self-interest of American capitalism to abolish poverty. And one of the reasons I have never sort of taken the attitude, in order to abolish poverty, we got to change capitalism, is because I think the struggle to change capitalism is going to take a while in this society, and I don't want to make the poor wait on me. But secondly, because I believe that poverty can be abolished by shrewd capitalists. And I want to work with them to do so. I think that the abolition of poverty is not a socialist or a radical demand. I think it's a liberal demand. The question is, all right, if we then abolish poverty in the United States, where will the capitalists go for their exploitation? Won't they go to the third world, to Asia, Africa, and Latin America? I can only give an absolutely miserable, sketchy, lousy answer to your question. For a brilliant and fully developed answer, I would refer you to my last book, Socialism, which unfortunately right now is selling at a very capitalist price of $12.50, but in the spring will be out in paperback at student prices. And if I can just summarize briefly what I said there, what I think to be true. The wealth of this economy is primarily derived not from the exploitation of the American poor, or even from the exploitation of the poor of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, a point I'll get to in a moment, but is derived from the ability of a minority to exploit the incredible social productivity of our technology and science. That's the real source of our wealth. That social productivity which is privately appropriated. That heritage of all of us, of all of our universities, of all of our minds, of all of our society, which a few are able to profit on much more than the many. Now, the reason I say that Asia, Africa, and Latin America are not critical to American capitalism is because, with one absolutely egregious exception, the empire of oil, since the end of World War II, American investments in the poverty of the third world have been in relative decline, and investments in Europe, Canada, Australia, and Japan have increased. That is to say, the pattern after World War II of capitalist advance has been much, much less the exploitation of the third world and much, much more trading in the affluence of the advanced economies. Therefore, I'm saying it is still absolutely necessary to democratize a social technology. A technology which is not only social in the way it's created. What makes us so fantastically productive is not that Henry Ford has a genius because he's the grandson of old Henry Ford. That really was not the genius, but because we have this science, this technology, this working together of an interdependent society. That I think we have to democratize. And also because this social technology has social costs and consequences, which affect every one of us. But I think it is, there's a kind of radicalism which is too simple, which says, aha, American capitalism has to have the American poor. It doesn't. And we don't even have to hurt the Indians and the Africans. We just do so because it's convenient to us, not because it's necessary. And we do hurt them. We take more money out of Latin America than we put in Latin America. They are subsidizing our living standard, those poor people. But it's not necessary. So, as I say, I've given a very bad answer. It's an extraordinarily complicated question. Those capitalists with $12.50 can get the answer quick, and the rest can get it in paperback in the spring. Yeah. question is that, given my example of housing benefiting the rich more than the poor, where does one work? Does one work as an administrator? Would you know the program's going to actually help the rich more? Does one work in the community? Where do you work? A number of things I would say in response to that. Number one, I would never underestimate the value of a scrap from the table if that's all that's there. I'm forgetting the whole loaf. But if there is some bread for some people, I think we have to fight for it. The Johnson War on Poverty was woefully inadequate, structurally and systematically inadequate, but it helped some millions of people get out of poverty. That's good. I was for it, knowing full well its inadequacies. I mean, that's a general philosophic point. I think the tactical point of when do you rebel against the underlying structural inequity of it all, and when do you try to adapt yourself to make the gains that are possible, that's a question that every man has to answer, every woman has to answer in a given situation. Finally, in terms of what one should do, I think one should do what one can do best. But not view that as the only way of doing things. If one is a terrific revolutionary tribune, go be a terrific revolutionary tribune. If one can work as an administrator to make things a little better, do that. But above all, it seems to me one has to understand, you got to win the presidency. You've got to win the Congress. You've got to win political power. Because these questions are not dependent on the decisions of individuals. They are systematic, political, economic, and social questions. That's why I attach the importance I do to 1972 and beyond. Let me take one last question. Yeah, the question is that I had commented on youth and the way in which we're creating a new experience there. What about the other end of the age continuum? What about aging? Here, I mean, you've had an absolutely fantastic change. About 100 years ago, 1% of the people in this country lived to be more than 65 years of age. Now you've got over 10% of the people in this country living to be over 65 years of age. You now have each year an increase in the number of people who are living to be 75 and 80 years of age. You also have some related phenomena. You have the fact that women tend to marry men who are older than they, and that women tend to live longer than men for a number of complicated biological and social and economic reasons that I don't think we quite understand yet. Therefore, you have a mass phenomenon. We were discussing it today in a panel discussion, a mass phenomenon of women aging alone after their husbands have died. We have a society which worships youth, in which people want to turn their back on the aging process. And I think that there is, so to speak, a problem of integration, not simply of races, but of generations. There's a terrible problem of simply losing contact. I thought in the absolutely heady days of the war on poverty, before the escalation of the war on Vietnam put an end to a lot of the really great hopes, that one of the things that the poor could do, one of the things you could hire poor people to do, would be to help in dealing with this. That here are these two excluded groups, poor and some aging people, and that maybe each could find needs and functions in the other which it could satisfy, and that would be one way of beginning to bridge this. I think in terms of planning for housing and so forth, that this integration is as necessary as a racial and social class integration. What I think, if I can sort of generalize all this, and I indicated in reference to an early question, I think my fundamental philosophic outlook, that the basic situation is that we are going to become more collectivist. We're going to plan more. We're going to have more social investments, not out of ideology, out of necessity. A necessity that even Richard Nixon realizes. David Broder, who was one of the shrewdest political reporters in Washington, in his book, The Party's Over, which is a book on the American party system, Broder made the comment that Richard Nixon has probably engaged in more planning than any president of the United States has ever done. Nixon, by the way, is the man who initiated the idea of 5-year budgetary figures, projecting budgetary figures for 5 years, which, if one were dirty and political, which I, of course, am not, you would say is a 5-year plan. And you would say, where did he get that kind of an idea? And what happened to him when he was in Moscow and Peking? But this is happening, and these problems of aging, problems of poverty, problems of the cities, problems of education, of pollution, worldwide problems of the incredible imbalance of income, of people dying in India where American oil companies profiteer on the fertilizer industry. These problems are such that we are going to plan more. The issue is not, as some conservatives think it is, will there be a collectivism to deal with these problems? It's already starting right now. The question is what kind. Whether it will be a bureaucratic collectivism, a totalitarian collectivism, a corporate-oriented collectivism, a collectivism that ignores the young and ignores the poor and the aging, or whether it's possible to have a democratic collectivism, whether we can seize the powers that we have created for ourselves for our own purposes. And it's in that sense that I think that one must be profoundly radical and look not simply to a redistribution of wealth, but to new principles of social organization and even to what I would call a new civilization. And on the other hand, there is this immediate problem that there are these poor people right now rotting in these slums and ghettos and backwoods, and you've got to do something for them tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And you've got to, in November of 1972, change as much as this miserable society can be changed. The challenge that I would like to conclude on is to invite you to share a place on the tightrope with me, to try to be true to a radical vision and at the same time implement it so it helps people tomorrow morning. That, it seems to me, is the challenge these days. Thank you.
still